It's been about a month ago now, I suppose. Jody, my wife, and I decided to go for a few days of vacation. We went to the Missouri countryside, and we stayed in a tree house on a lake. Now, maybe you hear tree house and you think that we were roughing it. It had air conditioning and a king-size bed, so no. But it did have a couple of trails around the lake, and so on Monday morning, the first day we were there, we were looking at the 2-mile and the 4-mile hike, and Jody said, let's do the 4-mile loop, and I said, great, because I love hiking, let's do it. So we got out there. It was hot, really, really hot, but there was a little bit of a breeze, and so we took off and made our way around, and eventually we came to a fork in the trail, and it seemed like to turn right was to take the short 2-mile loop back to the tree house, but to turn left was to go on the longer 4-mile hike. That seemed pretty clear to us, so we turned left, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked. The trail started getting weird. There was a giant tree that had fallen over the trail at one point, and we had to kind of climb around that, and that seemed strange. And then there was one section where I noticed some no trespassing signs. I think we were on the right side of them, but we just kept going, and then the grass on the trail started getting a little more dense, a little more brush, and we just kept going until we hit a locked gate, and there was nowhere else to go. We were stuck. We were lost in 100-degree heat. So we did the only thing we could do was just backtrack the way we had come. Our 4-mile hike turned into about 7. And that's when I noticed on our way back dozens and dozens of little ticks all over my pants. I completely melted down. I hate ticks. So we spent, the next 2 hours or so trying to get back to our treehouse, just hiking and swiping all the way home. It was terrible. There were ticks everywhere. When we finally made it back to the treehouse, I'm going to confess to you, I didn't go inside. I just shucked most of my clothes right on the deck. Anybody who happened to be watching, they got a show that day, man, I'm telling you. I'm picking off ticks off my arms and legs and feet. There's blood everywhere. Finally, I get into the shower. In the shower was a science experiment, okay? That's what that was. And so then we get back from a few days of vacation and people say, how was your time away? And so, what should I say? Should I talk about, the beauty of the Missouri countryside? Should I talk about the peaceful lake? Should I talk about the 99% of the time with my wife, which was a pure joy? No. I wanted to talk about the ticks and the detour on the path. Why do we do that? Why do I do that? Why do our hearts melt down over a detour? A few days after that trip, I was reading Psalm 33, and this line caught me. It says, the earth is full of God's unfailing love. Full. Even in Missouri. Full. Is that the way you see it? Or is the world full of things to complain about? Today we're continuing in our summer sermon series called Meltdown, where we're looking at some of the epic meltdowns all throughout the Bible and trying to cool our hearts in this season so we don't destroy our relationships with each other and with God. And I wonder, how can we replace the meltdowns of complaint with the cooling grace of gratitude? You ever find yourself complaining? Some of you were probably complaining this morning already, right? Have you ever found yourself complaining about everybody else complaining? Complaining, it seems, is everywhere. For a while, there was even a website several years ago called complain.org. And here was its description. It says, complain about anything. Complain about your neighbors, the airlines, noise, your mother-in-law. complain about high prices, the police, welfare, work, getting ripped off, complain to us or even about us, we'll listen and tell everybody, no exceptions. And it got pretty popular there for a while. Lots of people showed interest in it. They put their complaints online, and then the website shut down, and do you know what happened? Of course you do. People complained. Complaining is as common as ticks in the Missouri backcountry. And if you think a few wood ticks can ruin a perfectly good vacation, just wait to see what chronic complaining does to a whole community of God's people. You know, throughout thousands of years before I threw a temper tantrum on a deck in Missouri, the people of God took the same left turn onto the trail of complaint. Maybe you know the story. The family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob made their way into Egypt and had become enslaved by the Egyptian people. And yet God sent Moses to rescue his people from there. And he used 10 plagues to show his dominance over the gods of Egypt and to rescue his people. 10 plagues, not ticks, as I recall, but flies and frogs and such. And finally, Pharaoh let his people go, right? And so God's people made their way from there. God saved Israel from their slavery through the blood of the Passover lamb painted on their doorposts. They went through the waters of the Red Sea and were led by the Spirit, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, until the Spirit led them through the wilderness to the promised land of Canaan. That was their journey, their hike. And it's ours too. We too are saved from our slavery to sin through the blood of the Passover Lamb, Jesus Christ. We enter through the waters of baptism. We follow the Holy Spirit in the wilderness of this broken world until He leads us to the promised land of a new heaven and new earth. But life in the wilderness can leave us lost, vulnerable at times, kind of feeling like we're at a dead end. For Israel, God personally led his people out of slavery to a land flowing with milk and honey. And even in that kind of experience, it says in Numbers 11, the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. Such privilege and such a meltdown. You ever find yourself in that kind of circumstance? I do. It's so easy to take a left onto the trail of complaint. Israel did. Let's look at their story in Numbers 11, just this brief description. It says, now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused, and fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. And when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah, because fire from the Lord had burned among them. Let me hear you say Taberah. It's important we latch onto that term. Taberah was a place where the people of God complained, and it's a place we find pretty often ourselves, I think, if we're honest. So let's be clear about what complaining is. I want to offer a definition based on the story here of this meltdown in Israel's history. Complaining, first of all, I think is a choice to express dissatisfaction. It's a choice. The very term for complaining here in Hebrew, it means to groan or to murmur. Literally, these people, it says, were indulging in their own groaning. So understand, this is not a people offering a plea to God for help. This is not a lament. They're complaining about God, but not to God. This is not even a petition to Moses to try to help and change things. This is a pity party of emotionally exhausted people marinating in their own misery. Have you ever been there? God had just promised them goodness, but the people were focused on the evil. And this complaining trait had followed them all the way from Egypt, all the way you read, all through Exodus. Exodus 14, the people said to Moses, didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Exodus 15, the next chapter, the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? Exodus 16, the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted." Boy, slavery sounds pretty good. "But you've brought us out into the desert to starve the entire assembly to death." Exodus 17, the next chapter, the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. Oh, shush. The people cried out in a chorus of complaints over and over. Why can't we have more of this? And when are we going to get some of that? And why don't you let us? And each time they opened their mouth, they made a choice. And so do we. The earth is full of God's unfailing love. Is that the way you see it? Or do we just complain? I was reading recently about some words in the English language called orphaned words. Maybe you've heard of this. There are a lot of negative words that have hung on in the English language that should have an opposite positive word, but that's fallen away because of lack of use or for some other reason. So, for instance, we probably know what it means to be ruthless. Have you heard that word before? Ruthless, to be unforgiving or cruel, right? But we have forgotten and we have stopped using the positive side of that word, to be ruthful, which is an old English word to be compassionate or to have pity on people. So we don't talk about ruthful people anymore. There's all kinds of these. Maybe you're a little disheveled today. Have you heard that? Disheveled, your hair is maybe messed up, clothes kind of rumpled, disheveled. But Jim Blakely, he's very sheveled this morning. Looks great, put together, But we don't say that. We don't use that word, sheveled. Or maybe you're annoyed by the incessant heat or the incessant noise. It can kind of drive you crazy. But we never praise the cessant person, the opposite of that, which is somebody who knows how to pause or take a break or give it a rest, There's all kinds of words. Negative words that have hung on, but positive words have fallen out. Like Alex Falcone says, maybe you're chalant about all this grammar talk. I hope this leaves you gruntled and gusted. But I'm a little worried you might not like it. My spirit, he says, turns out is very domitable. My lack of confidence makes me vincible. And if people criticize me, I feel very scathed. But hopefully you found my brief attempt to be worthful. We have all these kind of negative vocabulary of grumbling that we've kept alive, but the vocabulary of contentment has dropped out of our daily speech in our language. Could the same be said of your words? Everyone has a choice on how to respond to tough circumstances. Complaining is a choice to express dissatisfaction that withers our trust in God. Again, did you hear it at Taberah? His anger was aroused. God saw complaining as an insult to his care. Our grousing to each other is an act of disbelief or unbelief in a sense. God's the one who provides life and health and breath and security and all of these things. And when we complain, we're saying, in essence, his provision isn't good enough. What have you done for me lately, God? And our complaints are insults. It can verbalize a lack of trust in God to protect us, to provide for us. Complaining withers our trust in God, and it ignites his anger. Did you hear it in the story? It was fire from the Lord at Taberah. Fire. The Hebrew term is usually referred to lightning. Our God of glory thunders when people choose self-pity. His love can't let us stay on that dead-end trail. Because you see, the same God who revealed himself as a burning bush is also a consuming fire, Hebrews says. The same God who resided upon the believers at Pentecost with tongues of fire in Acts chapter 2 is the same God who burned King Ahaziah's army in their unbelief in 2 Kings 1. Is it any wonder that Paul, when he speaks to the church at Philippi, says, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so you become blameless and pure, children of God without any fault in a warped and crooked generation. God sent fire. And yet I hope you heard the mercy in the story, did you notice he only sent it to the perimeter of their camp? If God had thrown fire down in the center of the camp, he would have wiped out all his people, or many, many people, but instead it's to the perimeter of the camp, his judgment on the outskirts, where unclean and ceremonially impure things were found. And God stopped his fire with the prophet's prayer. But boy, it got their attention. Taberah itself means catching fire or burning, which incidentally is one of the methods you can use to remove ticks from your body. You really shouldn't do it that way, is what I understand. You really shouldn't, but they will let go. Maybe it takes a flame for us to let go of our complaining as well. In Missouri, Jody and I, we turned left and got lost, riddled with ticks. And I can't tell you how many times I had the thought, if we had just turned right and stayed on the path, how much more pleasant our time would have been. What if we avoided the left turn into complaint and we chose a right turn into the path of gratitude? I think the Thessalonians caught this. Paul certainly encouraged them with these words. He says in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. This is God's will for you. Do you hear it? It's almost like Paul understood the trail blazed by Jesus Christ, the trail that reminds us that the earth is full of God's unfailing love. And the better path is to be grateful rather than to get lost in complaint. Daniel Berrigan pointed to this path. He wrote this. He said, be grateful. To be a saint is nothing less than to be warmed and vitalized by gratitude. We owe it to our Creator to appreciate things, to be as happy as we can, pay for a lovely moment by enjoying it, resist pessimism and false guilt. Add this section, he says, to the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread and help us to enjoy it without guilt. Be grateful. This was so important to the ancient Israelites that the Levites were officially appointed to stand at the temple morning and evening every day specifically to thank God. And then that responsibility was then passed on to all the people in Psalm 100, where the psalmist declares, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. The Hebrew term for give thanks is the word hodu. Let me hear you say hodu. We have to shower our lives with hodu. Let it wash over you to remove the complaints that come so easily. Here are a couple of simple exercises maybe to help cool down the meltdowns of complaint. Why don't you try this week to prayerfully have a no grumble week? Give it a shot. Some of you need to try a no grumble hour and then build from there. That's okay. When you catch yourself in a complaint, man, this traffic is terrible. Or man, the church is just changing so much. Try to reframe it in a moment of gratitude and to say, you know what? I'm thankful I have a car that works and a job to get to. I'm thankful God is stretching our church to reach new people. Just take a moment of entitlement and change it towards gratitude. That's one simple thing you can try. Or maybe this week, just try to name every blessing in your life. Every blessing in your life, every gift. We had a professor who did this for our class once, gave us 30 minutes to do it. It doesn't even scratch the surface. It's everything you've received in your life, everything you've experienced. The earth is full of his unfailing love. What is it that he's loved in your life? What love has he brought into your life? What things that you appreciate, what people you appreciate, what spiritual blessings has he given? Just list them out, write them down, read through them during the week. Around bedtime with your kids or your grandkids, around the dinner table, maybe with your small group, maybe come up with a new list every day. Just fill in the answers and be grateful. Give thanks in all circumstances, Paul says, even even after a tick-ridden hike in Missouri. Why? Because the earth is full of his unfailing love. I hope you believe that, and if you do, I hope you'll remember Taberah. I hope you'll practice Hodu. I hope you'll avoid epic meltdowns, because it is our choice, after all, how to see the world around us.